Day by day, it is getting very clear that China is afraid of any military confrontation, especially with the United States. Despite growing the economy and the military for decades, China is not able to take Taiwan, which sits in China's own backyard. What are the constraints that China faces despite growing itself so big? And why is China afraid of any military confrontation? Okay, what are the constraints that China faces? One constraint that China faces is that it has almost zero power projection capabilities. It has almost zero offshore or extraterritorial military bases or naval bases. The Americans have more than 800 extraterritorial military bases that essentially span the entire world. They can intervene anywhere militarily on the globe at about, let's say, 60 minutes notice. How many extraterritorial bases does China have? It has Djibouti, which there's a US base also on Djibouti, so that kind of balances things out. And there is one or two on Madagascar, small. There is Gwadar, which, now it's under Pakistan is a US vassal now, so China can't do a lot in Gwadar anymore. And that's about it. What else does it have? Nothing really. So China can't project power. The Americans can project power all the way into China. They have Guam, they have Diego Garcia, they have so many, they've got Japan, they have South Korea, they have so many other relationships. They have great relations with the Philippines. The Chinese have been bullying the Philippines. The Chinese are digging a hole of their own, they're in a hole of their own making, essentially. So there is the lack of power projection capabilities that the Chinese face. The second constraint is that they have cultivated hostile relations with all their neighbors. They nearly went to war with Russia in 1969. The Russians have never trusted China after that. The Chinese have been claiming territory from all their neighbors. Nobody likes them, nobody trusts them, everybody fears them. The Chinese have deliberately refused to demarcate the India-Tibet border for decades. Maybe now slowly India starts getting the advantage because we have an undemarcated border. All this time it's been China with the advantage, front foot. Now China slowly goes on the back foot now. You see, so the hostile relations with all its neighbors, not one good relationship, apart from North Korea, which is its own story. Then another constraint is that China is not a net exporter of energy. It's a net importer of energy. China may import, China produces about 60 to 70% of its own energy, but when it comes to oil and gas, it has to import that. So China depends on other nations for its critical, vital energy supplies. It's been building up strategic reserves and all that, but that's a stopgap measure. China doesn't have its own oil and gas reserves that can, take care of its demand. So it depends on nations like Iran, like Saudi Arabia, like the UAE, like Nigeria, like Indonesia, like Venezuela, etc. And all of these nations, most of them are on excellent terms with the US. Or even if they may not possibly be on excellent terms with the US, they can't deny US, let's say, requests to, let's say, stop, hypothetically, selling oil to China. If this US request comes in, these nations have to agree to it. So that's a big constraint that China faces, right? So there's a bunch of constraints such as these that the Chinese face. Then you have the fact that the Chinese navy is hemmed in by 3 island chains. Which are these island chains? Well, let's crack out the map. We haven't opened the map and thus far. Let's open it. What are there are 3 island chains that encircle China. So the first island chain is essentially, Japan. The Japanese islands come all the way here. Okay, by the way, Yonaguni Island is right next to Taiwan. So all these islands, it's an island chain that you see here. These are Japanese islands. Okay, Okinawa, Shorin. So Okinawa is there, and then all the other islands all the way to Taiwan. And from Taiwan, we have the Philippines and all the other islands, these island nations and all. So that's one island chain that hems or ring fences China. And Japan is, under US occupation. Taiwan is a US ally. When it comes to nations like the Philippines, they are bullied by China, so they are also on excellent terms with the US. Malaysia, Singapore, um, Indonesia, all these nations that depend on the US for protection against China. Vietnam also has good relations with the US. So the Chinese Navy is hemmed in by the first island chain. Then you have a second island chain and a third island chain, which are further rings of islands, and then you have Guam here, which is a major U.S. military base. You will see two airports on Guam. One's gonna, I know, three airports, at least three. Yeah, one of these is a, I don't know. Is there a domestic? I mean, is there an actual international airport here, or is it all military bases? So you have military bases here, you have naval bases, and so on, and it's a major place from which the US projects power against China. So you have three island chains that ring fence China, and the Chinese ships, whenever they want to pass out into the Pacific Ocean, they have to go through rings of US allied nations and their assets, and essentially they can't do a thing without the Americans observing exactly what they're doing. So that's another constraint the Chinese face. So all these constraints come together. And of course, they've been trying to catch up economically, which they have done a great job of with US help. Yeah. And they've been trying to catch up technologically, and they've done a fantastic job of catching up technologically. Primarily, the primary driving factor was the Chinese rejuvenation and reformation of its education system. They poured in trillions of dollars into their education system and have made it world class. Now, some of the best universities in the world are Chinese universities. They're all focused on research and development and technology. That's why China is pretty powerful as a technologically powerful nation. Um, you know, but they're still behind the US in AI. They're significantly behind the US in space and so on. So these are the constraints that China faces. Some of the constraints.